Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm Josh Strife Hayes and I love MMORPGs. I've played them for the majority of my life and collectively have spent tens of thousands of hours inside virtual worlds. After my extensive time gaming and living through so many online games, I've come to realise there are a few problems present in the MMORPG world. This is a series of videos discussing what's ruining the MMORPG genre. Today, why graphics are ruining MMORPGs. That sounds like a very difficult to defend position, that graphics are ruining MMOs, but bear with me and let me explain. There are some truly stunning MMORPG games on the market today. Black Desert Online, Guild Wars 2, Elder Scrolls Online, even Eve looks absolutely gorgeous. And I'm not saying that the art designers aren't skilled or talented people, and I'm not saying the design team shouldn't be incredibly proud of what they've achieved. I am saying that MMORPGs will suffer from constantly progressing graphics. And to explain why, I'd like to talk about how we as gamers have changed from no graphics to basic graphics to photorealism, and how our brains have changed with that and the issues it's created. As we've discussed before, the MMORPG genre borrows heavily from tabletop RPG gaming scene, such as Dungeons & Dragons. In these tabletop games, the RPG element or role-playing game is placed first. Each player must be their character. When I personally run Dungeons & Dragons games, I do not use a grid-based map. The reason I avoid a grid-based map is simply because when players are forced to visualize and picture the scenario in their heads, it becomes more personal and more vivid. Our imagination is more powerful than any Hollywood special effect could ever be, so tapping into human imagination is the best way to create a truly breathtaking story, allowing our brains to do the processing instead of simply showing us a picture. The early online games were text-based, having a text interface and needing user input commands such as go west or look at tree. These games didn't have any graphics at all, so the story and adventure existed entirely in your head, a personal journey populated by whatever your imagination chose to fill in the blanks with. Instead of showing us a tree, we just imagined it. And when you're forced to imagine something, it sticks in your mind. The process of creating an image in your head makes it memorable. With the MMORPG gaining popularity around the last 1990s to early 2000s, the text-based game fell by the wayside and the graphical interface became standard. Gamers wanted pictures. However, designers were still heavily limited by the technology they had access to at the time. The age of photorealistic graphics hadn't yet arrived, and so textures, animations, and interaction with the game world was low resolution and clunky. As players, we were able to understand that the graphics in these games were more a representation of whatever they were showing, not a direct emulation. For example, in an old game, and you can still see this in old games, would show a heavy chain, such as one holding up a drawbridge, like flat O shapes linked together, and if you got close enough to them in-game, you'd see they only have one plane and no depth. They're simply a flat image. They are a low-resolution texture. This is a representation of a chain, not an actual chain. But as gamers, we overlooked and understood the limitations of the time, and filled in the gaps with our own imagination. You've shown me what I am supposed to understand as one thing, and so I will use my imagination to complete the understanding. As graphics improved, the idea of representing something fell out of fashion, as game designers now had the ability to fully emulate it. More polygons and high-resolution textures meant our imagination wouldn't have to do as much work, as the entire thing, whatever it was, would be shown to us, graphically and perfectly, a photorealistic depiction. As the power of graphics marched toward photorealism, our imagination and the degree we have to actually use it to fill in the blanks was reduced and reduced. This is why horror films are best when you don't see the monster. You're afraid of the creature you've created in your own head. Your imagination does all the work, which will always be scarier than anything a character designer could come up with. Now, we're at a stage where the use of imagination is virtually zero. You're shown exactly what you're expected to see in every game. The graphics leave nothing to the imagination. They provide you, as a gamer, with all the possible info you could need. So with the imagination removed from the equation, what do graphics have to replace it with? Because you can't remove something as powerful as imagination and not replace it with an equally brilliant or emotionally fulfilling thing. The answer, in this case, is stylistic choice. Okay, so this is all sounding great, but I haven't actually linked it with MMORPGs yet. Where does the link happen? Well, I see two main areas where MMORPGs suffer from this increase in graphical power. Once again, I'm not saying graphics are a bad thing in themselves or that I dislike beautiful games. I'm saying these two problems will happen specifically to MMORPGs because of increased graphics in games. Number 1. The loss of style. Photorealism is a style of art. The attempt to get a visual depiction in a game or film to perfectly match real life, texture, light reflection or refraction, reaction to outside forces, water manipulation. Photorealism is one specific style of art, and it is indeed fascinating. But when every game aims for this art style, it becomes generic and breaks down any elements of unique style the game possessed before. First-person shooters suffer from this the most. The constant stream of gritty, brown and grey, dark-scale, realistic shooters has created an influx of games who all have beautiful graphics, but they all share exactly the same style. In this case, style should be more important than graphics. World of Warcraft has a very distinct style. The blocky, almost cartoony at points models, the low polygon counts, bright colours, oversized shoulder pads, comically big hands, forearms and heads, or pointy parts on the majority of the Horde armour. World of Warcraft is not the most graphically advanced game, but it doesn't need to be. Because, with all games, graphics should be used to show your style. And the style of World of Warcraft is striking and memorable. The art style of any game is a visually dominating and defining trait, and the more unique art styles, such as the comic book style of Borderlands, or the cell shading of 13, the simple, clinical white lines of Portal with the bright orange and blue portals themselves, or the Art Deco of Bioshock. These art styles are unique to the game. They become so strongly associated with the game that the style itself becomes that game's style in popular culture. If someone else tried to make a game that looked like Borderlands, they'd say, oh, it's a Borderlands copy. Not because they're copying the gameplay, but because they're copying the style. The style is used to enhance the story, the emotional impact of a game's location. A memorable place in a video game can be made more memorable if it's saturated in that game's specific style. In these games, the graphics are used to show the style, and it's the style you connect with and remember. Unfortunately, a large amount of games in general, which is creeping toward MMORPGs, are pushing toward a very similar graphical style, simply because they're chasing a graphical endgame, more polygons, higher textures, more photorealism. Instead of saying, what is our style, they're all saying, I want to look real. Black Desert Online is beautiful, Terra is beautiful, Elder Scrolls Online, Guild Wars 2, these are all very popular and very successful. But they don't have the immortal, memorable style of, say, World of Warcraft or old school RuneScape. I'm not saying they're not great-looking games. I'm saying if you showed a non-gamer a screenshot of any of them with none of the identifiable information of the overlay, a lot of the screenshots would look very similar. Similar-looking games aren't ugly. They're actually very beautiful, but they're not memorable. Something looking photorealistic with a high-res texture doesn't make it memorable. What makes something memorable is being unique. To relate that to MMORPGs, how many generic forests have you journeyed through with no real difference? How many fantasy medieval cities or villages have we wandered through? And now how many can you remember as having something visually or uniquely striking about them? To relate it back to regular games, I vividly remember the giant mushrooms of Morrowind, not because they were realistic, but because they were unique and stylistic. The city of Anor Londo from Dark Souls is stunning and memorable, not because it looks realistic, but because the first time you see it, it's so stylistic. The giant spires and oversized pillars. Increased textures would not improve that. It's already memorable. When an MMORPG discovers what style it is, it can stop chasing better and better graphics, which has the beneficial effect of preventing it from running further and further toward the generic, pretty but forgettable style so many others share. That's point 1, graphical quality superseding style. Point 2, increased graphics require increased hardware to play. Black Desert Online, for an example, is gorgeous, but good luck running it on an old PC, even at low settings. Terra is lovely, but once the screen is full, even my PC begins to struggle. And any MMORPG ported to consoles such as Neverwinter or The Elder Scrolls Online on PlayStation 4 must reduce some settings and play at slightly lower graphics. These reduced graphics on console also serve to highlight the previous point. There was no overriding style to how the game should look, beyond the executive decision of better. If you increase the hardware requirement to play a game, you reduce the number of people able to play it. Not every gamer has a PC capable of running the latest game with the latest graphics. Placing graphics ahead of style creates a limitation. Only players with access to powerful hardware can play, and that can get expensive. Take World of Warcraft, however. The game will still run on a much older PC, and old-school RuneScape has now been ported to mobile and won a BAFTA for it. These are old games, with old graphics, perfectly suited to their style. And I firmly believe the reason their player base is still so high is because they've kept the hardware barrier for entry as low as possible, while still maintaining their distinctive style they're known for having. If you're disagreeing on the style part, take your favourite game and reduce it to 2 or 3 graphical traits. If I was to take old-school RuneScape, I'd take the heads in the chat box only moving once every few frames, the yellow text, and the camera being above the character and behind. I could take these 3 stylistic choices and draw a picture that a knowledgeable gamer would look at and go, oh, that's RuneScape. I could take the same for World of Warcraft. Large shoulder pads, big hands, blocky, chunky scenery. And an experienced gamer would likely look at a picture featuring those traits and go, oh yes, this represents the stylistic choices of World of Warcraft. If you cannot break down a game into stylistic choices beyond photorealism, then that game is lacking a unique element. If photorealism then is the only graphical trait you're trying to have, you're going to need a very expensive and powerful PC to play it. As you increase the requirements to run it, you decrease the number of people who are able to run it. So what's the solution? Well, I see 2 main graphical considerations to be kept in mind. I think to help MMORPGs push into the future and attract more players, we should look at 1. Place style first. Once any MMORPG knows what style it's going for, achieve that with as fewer resources as possible. Make each stylistic choice stand out. Don't try to be like the many other gritty, realistic, brutal games. Choose a recognizable style, then use your graphics to serve that style. Don't make your style simply good graphics. That has no heart, no soul. That's not actually a style. That's an attempt at emulating what already exists, instead of making a striking or memorable artistic statement of your own. Why do you think every MMORPG that looks even a little like World of Warcraft is called a WoW clone? Even if that game has different gameplay, its graphical style would be close enough to be instantly compared. And in the world of art, being compared to something superior to you isn't a good thing. It simply serves to remind the customer that you are the inferior version of something else. As a personal note to this, I love the watercolour artwork of Guild Wars 2. Every loading screen or merchandising art piece has this lovely, expressionist, passionate watercolour vibe, and I really wish they would bring that into the game more. Let weapons moving through the air leave a painted trail, or have cities in the distance look like works of art. Guild Wars 2, you're brave enough to say, this is our style, so let the game show that. 2. Optimize the game to run on a low-end system. I'm not saying to remove the high-end possibility. If you want to run max draw distance and max particle effects, and you can afford to do so, I absolutely encourage that. But I believe game designers should build games with a larger audience in mind. Remember, the point of an MMORPG is to bring us together as gamers, not push us apart. And allowing a game to run on older hardware massively increases the potential player base. When adding a low graphics mode, instead of just removing textures or reducing the character model count, it would be nice to see simpler, stylistic textures added instead, or character models with fewer polygons but striking style. Everyone knows what an old-school RuneScape character looks like. It's a simple, yet strong, stylistic choice. But the newer RuneScape 3 models are widely regarded as ugly, as they removed the distinctive RuneScape style in the search of more graphics just for the sake of more graphics. To sum up, I'm not saying graphics are inherently bad or that I'm against progress. I was blown away by how good Uncharted 4 looked when I first played it. Great graphics have their place. We now live in a period of time where games contain impressive graphics as standard. Text-based adventure games may still exist, but they're not a dominant market force, so our own imagination isn't needed. Because we're not required to engage our imagination as much, we must, as players, look to bold and unique styles of games to capture our fascination and be memorable. The graphical power or prowess of a game must be used to show its unique style, what makes it different. The style of a game doesn't need to be demanding or incredibly highly textured to be memorable or even carry emotional impact. Think of some older, simpler games with unforgettable style. The monsters or circuitry-covered walls of Doom. The cute art of Rayman. I'm sure we were all shocked when Ares died in Final Fantasy VII, but if you rewatch that cutscene, the graphics aren't impressive, but the style is memorable. I'd love to see more MMORPGs push toward their own graphical style, whatever that may be, and to use that style to really make an impact on the world and the players, instead of just saying, how can we make this look real? Which is an impressive feat, but not a memorable one. Once the style has been established, it needs to run on the lowest end equipment possible, because the less demanding it is to run, the larger the potential player base can become, and a large player base is always a good thing for an MMORPG. As usual, thank you very much for watching. What are your opinions? Have graphical advancements improved, ruined, or had no impact at all on the MMORPG genre? Let me know in the comments below and I'll try to respond to all of them, or come and chat to me live on Twitch. I'm normally streaming most nights over at twitch.tv/Josh Strife Hayes. Thank you very much for your time and have a great day.